Chapter 10, Criminal Justice Reform with Teddy Randel.
The number of drug arrests in an inner city versus the number of drug arrests on the college campus close to the local city. Speaking from personal experience, a fairly similar amount of drugs is done and sold in both areas, but college campuses aren't policed. So those kids don't lose their entire future for selling an eighth of weed to their buddy.
I'm your host, Farhana, and welcome to Earth's Narrative.
If that's a Hollywood actor or someone who owns a business or some very well-to-do person, they just pay the money, get out of jail. That's it.
In this podcast, we capture the voices and stories of the mental health advocates, the community organizers, the teachers, the sustainable business owners, the loud and proud change makers of today. We are taking back the pen and writing our own narrative, Earth's narrative. America is having a crisis, and I'm not talking about COVID-19. With national media attention covering police brutality throughout our country, criminal justice reform is now part of a larger conversation for racial equity. In this chapter, I got the opportunity to speak with Teddy Randel, veteran and law student at Emory Law, about the systemic problems that our criminal justice system faces today. Randel breaks down why America values punishment over rehabilitation and how the system corrodes our society and leaves people in a perpetual cycle of violence and crime. Thankfully, there are people out there, like Randel, doing the work to fix this oppressive system. Let's listen to what he has to say. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate it, Teddy Randel.
How's it going?
So can you tell the listeners a bit about yourself, just to start off?
Sure. So I was in the Air Force right out of high school, served 6.5 years. When I got out of high school, I dipped into maybe the not so positive parts of life and society, and saw some of my friends go down for some BS drug charges, which originally made me want to be a lawyer to begin with. So I moved across the country, went to Santa Monica College, which is where I know you from. From there, I went to UCLA and graduated with a degree in philosophy. And now I'm at Emory Law. I'm in my 2L year, my second year at Emory Law, and working at the public defender's office in DeKalb County.
That's awesome. So you said that it was like personal experiences that kind of started this inspiration for criminal justice reform. Exactly. Can you go more into that?
Sure. Obviously, without, going into personal details.
No.
But Georgia has some, or at least at the time, this was several years ago, had some pretty draconian drug laws. So in particular, I had a friend who had quit doing drugs several years prior due to legal issues and got pulled over. As local cops can tend to do, they searched his car without having a proper warrant. They found one marijuana seed and considered that intent to grow. And he ended up getting out of it. He got a good lawyer, but he had to pay thousands and thousands of dollars. And if he didn't have the money to do that, he would have been screwed. And that's kind of what our justice system does. It screws poor people.
Yeah. So I was looking into some stats, and as of June 2020, America has the highest incarceration rates per capita in the world. Do you have any insight as to why that is? I mean, you kind of touched on it right now with over policing.
Yeah. So there's a couple of factors there. To start from the beginning, you really got to look at the 13th Amendment, which ended slavery. But the loophole to that, and you can go and read it in the 13th Amendment, it ends slavery unless you're a prisoner. So that just started out the whole judicial system, coming from a very racist country at the time that, many states didn't want to get rid of slavery, and that just allowed them a loophole to continue doing the same thing. As long as they arrested people for a crime first, they could maintain a free labor force, more or less. But that the movie 13 on Netflix, the documentary, covers that pretty well. I would highly recommend it if people want to learn more about that specifically. It really covers the progression of how that amendment has gone. But for more modern day reasons for why we incarcerate so many people. Firstly, there's too many nonviolent crimes that people get locked up for. Drug offenses, I think, is the number one thing. You know me, I'm very against the drug war, and I think the statistics are pretty clear. I have a graph, but I don't know how to screen share. Anyway, since the war on drugs started originally with Nixon and then Reagan supercharged it with all the funding and manpower, our prison population has skyrocketed. I would say 900%. Like, it's a truly staggering amount of people that we imprison now as compared to before the drug war. So that's a big part of it. And then another big factor is that police officers and prosecutors advance their careers based on arrests and convictions.
Is it like a point system or something like that, where it's like, I know that a quota that they have in certain areas?
Sure. It's nothing so set in stone. But like for a prosecutor, if you want to run for DA and be DA, you need a good conviction rate. You need to win cases. And so your career motivation is to put people in jail, whether or not they're actually guilty. And the same is with police, although it's not like an official, like, hey, you make this many arrests, you'll get promoted. The people who make more arrests work their way up the ranks, especially those who the arrests turn into convictions, because then they can point at it and say, I'm cleaning up the streets, I'm making it a better place. But the problem with that is there's zero accountability, right? So if someone is wrongfully convicted by a prosecutor and it's proven, that prosecutor experiences no repercussions whatsoever. They can outright fudge things and play games and know the person is innocent, and put them in jail while withholding evidence that would exonerate them. To me, that's like, especially in something like a murder case, to me, that's attempted murder. Because if you're going up for something that could involve the death penalty and you're withholding exculpatory evidence, you could end up getting that person killed. And there's just no accountability for that whatsoever. The bar doesn't disbar people for that. And the same with judges. There's just no accountability for judges or for prosecutors.
Damn. Do many states still have the death penalty?
No, that's an extreme example.
Okay.
And even the states that do, they don't execute a lot of people anymore. I mean, obviously Texas does, but it's Texas for you.
But
Georgia has the death penalty, but I don't think we don't execute very many people. But if you execute even one innocent person, to me, that it's not worth the juice isn't worth the squeeze, as it were.
Yeah, I've never heard that saying, but yeah, I'd rather have 10 guilty people all out on the streets than one innocent person in jail. Yeah, so I wanted to talk a little bit about your work at the Public Defender's Office in DeKalb County. Am I saying that right?
DeKalb. Yeah.
DeKalb. Okay, DeKalb County. It's those L's, man.
Yeah.
I grew up saying Salmon. So I know that for public defenders, they typically are assigned to people that don't have the funds to get their own lawyers. Is that correct?
Yeah. And you see in Law and Order, you have the right to an attorney.
Right.
We are that attorney. Now in Georgia, they still have to pay a $50 fee, which is kind of bullcrap, especially if you're like a homeless person or something. It can get waived, but the fact that there's still a fee is kind of weird. But in terms of how working at that office has affected my views on criminal justice, and I'm pretty blessed because DeKalb Public Defender is the highest funded public defender office in the Southeast. They're a model for the other public defense offices. So I feel very fortunate to intern there. But the biggest thing I notice is it's really luck of the judge. You get different, like if you're going for a bond hearing, right? Which, and don't get me started on the bond system. That's terrible. Maybe in a few minutes, but the judge gets to determine your bond amount, what whether or not you get out of jail, basically. And it just seems to fall on the personal opinion of the judge. So people can get a really mean judge or a really nice judge and have the exact same case facts and entirely different outcomes based solely on the judge they got. So that's disheartening a little bit, because I know that's not just DeKalb County. That's everywhere. That's the justice system. That's how it works. And then there's the cash bail system, which I mentioned, which keeps poor people in prison. But apart from the negative, the positive part of working at the public defender's office is the feeling of helping people far outweighs the defense of really guilty people. Obviously, every now and then you have to defend someone who's done horrible things. But even those people still have rights, and their rights need to be upheld. It's bigger than just them. You know, if you infringe on the worst criminals' rights, that is a slippery slope, and it sets a bad precedent. And I really enjoy being on this side of it.
Yeah, I've started to see that that's actually where the conversation is starting to move towards in our country. I mean, it's so unfortunate. You see so many stories, like I think it's like every month now, of just like another police killing or something like this. And it's really chaotic to see the Facebook comments, or just like any comment on Twitter or anything. It's like, I saw one today where the guy wasn't even black. He was like a white guy that was like handcuffed in the police station, and they like shot him in the head for, I'm not even sure why exactly. And it was like extremely, extremely graphic. But what was more disheartening was to see there were so many people that tried to justify it by saying like, oh, well, he was reaching for a gun and he was doing this and blah, 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 blah. And I just wanted, I guess, your opinion on just like, why is the country starting to become so partisan in this issue where human life just seems to be meaningless at this point?
I think that's an issue with humans in general. You know, that's the whole, how could people have been guards in Nazi Germany over the concentration camps? And the reality is anybody could do that in the right circumstances. This is somewhat outside of my particular expertise, but being from rural Georgia and having lived in LA, that's like two vastly different ideological spectrums. And especially in a rural community, which is where you see a lot of those comments defending indefensible things, it's about tribalism. It's about the security of community. You know, everybody around them believes the same thing, so they have to believe the same thing to be a part of the community. Many of the people saying those things, I really believe would have a different reaction were they to see it in person, but I don't know for sure, but it's very disheartening. I try to limit my time on social media.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, like having to see the discourse and stuff too, especially since 45, the president himself is saying things like this too. It's hard to ignore that it's not just like random people online. It's also the political leaders, of our time.
It definitely emboldens them. I think my personal opinion is President Trump is the president of the assholes. And there's a lot of assholes. And they love him because he just says things. He has no professionalism. And they're like, oh, that's cool. That means I can do that now, too. And it's OK. And it's really just not OK. He just happens to come from a position where he's never held accountable for it. But that's not us. That's not the everyday person. Yeah.
So you were mentioning earlier that incarceration and the prison system as a whole is just like modern day slavery. And I wanted to know if you could expand on some of the challenges that people face who have criminal records once they serve their time.
Yeah, so that's really rough. And it's where you can really see the cycle of poverty because, you mentioned in the beginning, police poor areas. And that really is true. And a great example of that is the number of drug arrests in an inner city versus the number of drug arrests on the college campus close to the local city. speaking from personal experience, a fairly similar amount of drugs is done and sold in both areas, but college campuses aren't policed. So those kids don't lose their entire future for selling an eighth of weed to their buddy. But, you know, if you're in an area that's heavily policed, you get pulled over. Literally, all they have to do is say, I smell weed. There doesn't even have to be any smell of weed. That's all they have to say for probable cause. And, you know, you get arrested and they find a gram in your car, and in the right jurisdiction, you know, you go down, or they find a felony amount. And once you have a felony, once you've entered the system, your options are severely limited. First of all, you can't vote anymore once you're a felon. Your job opportunities are incredibly limited. So even starting with the disprivilege that occurs from starting out in a poor area, a poor side of town, it's just amplified by the fact that you now have a felony. So even the jobs that were available before, which are already limited, or less limited, and this leads to a cycle of crime, because the only way you have to take care of yourself is crime, selling more drugs, robbing, you know, stuff like that. And people think some people are just more prone to crime than others, and that's not true. Everywhere you take that argument, it either roots in racism or something else. The fact of the matter is it's economic disenfranchisement. If you are trying to feed yourself, trying to feed your kids, trying to do anything that requires money, you can work at McDonald's, or you can look at your buddy down the street who's slinging drugs, making $5,000 a month or something. What are you going to do? Obviously, you're going to take the avenue that has more money. And it just creates this vicious cycle. Then more police come and they police it even heavier. And it's like a washing machine of destruction of opportunity.
Yeah, that's a great analogy right there. Do you see a path forward for America? Like, what steps do you think that we need to take? I mean, there's like the local level, and then there's like, you know, the federal level, the state level. There's different tiers, obviously. But what do you think, in your opinion?
I think the biggest thing we could do to help would be ending the drug war in this country. You know, in our current climate, we have people, hundreds of thousands of people in every major city, in every state, still protesting police violence and police brutality. You know, there's talks of defunding the police, which of course becomes immediately a political issue. But in my opinion, we don't even have to talk about defunding the police. If you end the drug war, that's 70% of what police do anyway, is policing nonviolent drug offenses. That's where all their funding comes from. So ending the drug war would do a lot to solving that just on the face of it. It would also help in terms of the racial strife we have going on, because people of color are definitely, unquestionably targeted. You can just look at the statistics of who's in prison, and that boils down to two things. Either people of color inherently commit more crimes because they're people of color, which is not a viable argument, or there's something societal going on. And obviously there's something societal going on that stems, like I said, from the 13th Amendment originally. And it's just problems we've never really dealt with and just been kicking the can down the road since literally slavery, since the end of the Civil War. And that was ratcheted up by Reagan with the drug war. I think ending the drug war is the biggest step we as a country can take. The second one I would say is accountability measures, like ending qualified immunity for police. That just allows police to get off scot-free if the details don't exactly match a case that's already happened, which is never going to happen. You know, maybe some sort of accountability for prosecutors, disbarment for unethical prosecution, you know. But just off the top of my head, those are two things I think we really need to do if we want the strife to end.
You were talking about ending the drug war. Does this mean that you're pro legalizing all drugs, or is it just certain substances? Because I mean, there's a vast array of, the substances that are used daily.
Sure. And unfortunately here, I have to kind of split up what I personally believe with what I think is maybe realistic or the most effective. I do personally believe drugs should be legal because I feel like what you do with your body is your business. If you're not hurting other people, that's your right. But that's not palatable for the majority of this country right now, I don't think. So instead of legalizing, simply decriminalizing would do a lot to help our current issues with over-incarceration and over-policing of communities of color and poor communities. Just quit felonizing people for drugs. That's not legalizing it even. That's just not punishing people for it. Put them in rehabilitative or a recovery program instead of putting them in prison.
Yeah, I suppose that goes back into just the whole argument for defunding the police, though, right? Is just taking the funding that they have in certain areas and just putting it back into the community. So you're saying for rehabilitation, obviously these lower income communities don't have the funds for these type of mental health services and other, social services. Which is and education too, which is another key part of it. You can't expect people to move up in the world and improve their life if they never receive a decent education. And when public schools are based off the income of the community you live in, you just grow up with no education, no opportunity, no advancement unless you're a truly remarkable person, which is very rare. Yeah. That's so depressing to think about.
Yeah, it's not the most encouraging thing, but I'm very encouraged currently by the number of people out on the streets. A monolith seems unapproachable until all of a sudden it's falling over. And, if you had said a year ago, there would be hundreds of thousands of people in every major city, in every state, protesting police brutality, I wouldn't have believed it. So I think we are taking steps forward. We're just in the really hard time, the hard part of it right now.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you in the sense that there is a huge change in our society when it comes to just the protesting, and people are definitely much more aware of certain racial injustices that are happening now. Also, I think it has in part to do with because we have the time. We're already so frustrated with everything that's going on with this administration and with the pandemic and with unemployment and all of this stuff that it has raised up so many of these issues. But at the same time, as much as I see protests, I don't see what you're saying, accountability for these police officers. The most that I've ever seen is probably they've gotten fired, where they really should be in jail for what they've been doing.
Yeah, and what is disheartening for me, and I try to stay an optimist. I always try to stay positive, which is hard right now. Yeah. Especially when you look at the fact that, so many states are, painting Black Lives Matter on the street and not ending qualified immunity. Still, Colorado's the only state that's ended it. And
Colorado.
Go Colorado.
Always ahead of the trend.
Might be number one on my move to list.
There you go.
But I can't remember if it was Malcolm X or Martin Luther King. Doesn't matter. The message remains the same. In this country, we have a habit of placating racial issues with performative nonsense instead of actual functional change. And I do see a lot of that currently. California, unfortunately, their state government is guilty of it. They completely failed to pass any police reform measures after the George Floyd murder because of the influence of the police union. So even in a very liberal state like California, the police unions have so much power. And the truth is, a lot of the maybe more well-to-do liberal side of people don't see these real issues. So they see the performative nonsense and they're like, we're getting stuff done, but nothing's actually happening. It's just getting you the more well-to-do liberal to think that it's not a problem anymore. So, you don't make a stink out of it.
Well, California did recently just pass a law. I think Governor Newsom passed a bill where inmates that were firefighters are allowed to actually continue to be on the force after they've served their time, which I think is definitely a step in the right direction.
For sure. And I'm very glad to see that, because that was, slavery. Forcing prisoners to fight fires with no money and no career. They got paid I think up to $1 an hour, but come on.
That also just goes into why America has a for-profit prison system, which I don't understand where the inception of this even started, other than, we are an extremely capitalist country. So
yeah, capitalism and government cronyism, that's where it started. And even our, obviously, our situation this November is fairly clear. It's unfortunate, but our best bet is two people who still have no motivation and no intention of changing any of those things. And it's decades of that type of leadership that led us to this problem. And again, obviously, I feel our choice is fairly clear in November, but I'm very upset. And I think that's something we do need to do as a country, is start demanding better from our political parties. And until we start doing it for our own political parties and stopping this tribalism nonsense, this is my team, so I got to go along with it. Republicans have to demand better from the GOP, and Democrats have to demand better from the DNC. They're both getting screwed, but they always point the finger at the other instead of recognizing their own filth. So I think that's really important for us moving forward.
Yeah. So what can you suggest for the listeners? What can we do to help change the culture around the criminal justice system? Obviously, voting is one.
The hardest part, and I even find this hard for myself just because I'm so busy and there's so much to do, is just being educated on your local judicial system. Who are your judges? Who's your DA? Most of these positions run unopposed. So you can have a DA for 40 years that nobody even knows who he is, who doesn't get in trouble with the law, but the whole time he's breaking the law and doing unethical things and sending people to prison who don't deserve to be in prison or are outright innocent, simply because no one knows who their DA is. And when their ballot comes up, there's only one choice. So I think learning your local political system and voting locally and being educated on that is a huge step. But like I say, even I have problems with that. It's a lot of information to have to know when to vote. It's never the same time as other elections. And also just learn more, learn about the cash bail system. If you really want to make change, just, do your own research, and you'll be amazed at what you'll find, specifically with cash bail. It's just an atrocious system. I'll give you an example. I have a client right now who's from a poor side of town. He's in jail on trumped up charges. There's no evidence. There's no physical evidence. There's no motive, no nothing. He was on $1 million bond, which is obviously not possible. We got it reduced to $75,000, which is more reasonable for the case at hand. But here's the thing. If that's a Hollywood actor or someone who owns a business or some very well-to-do person, they just pay the money, get out of jail. That's it, right? And then that $1 million bail, if they're able to pay it, they get it all back when they go to trial. It's just to make sure you don't flee. But poor people, since they can't afford the big lump sum, they have to go to a bail bondsman, which is a private company, and all they do is profiteering. And what the bail bond will do is you have to pay 12% of your total bond, right? So if you have $1 million bond, I don't know, I'm bad at math, that's why I'm a lawyer. Whatever.
120,000.
Right. You would have to give the bail bondsman $120,000, and then they'll front your bail, but they never actually pay it. It's 100% profit for the bail bond companies. And then you get out, on bail, you never get that 120,000 back. You just lose it. So the system from the start punishes poor people, because rich people who can afford bail get it all back. Poor people just lose it. They just lose it because that's how the system's set up. And then if you need an ankle monitor, you have to pay for the ankle monitor yourself. But surprise, surprise, you're not allowed to work. So how are you supposed to do that? And there's literally no purpose for it except to punish poor people. You know, because rich people can just pay it and go get on with their lives, do whatever they want. And the only difference is income.
Damn. Yeah, I mean, you definitely see like all of these. I mean, Jeffrey Epstein, I feel like, is one of the most infamous cases too, where I think he was arrested like twice, and he was just like on a random house arrest the first time, even though his criminal charges were he was under investigation for such a long time. And
I think when he actually got incarcerated, they still let him leave the prison for up to 16 hours a day. It's like,
for work.
Yeah, it's insane. My client doesn't get that.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to also talk, because you were mentioning that your public defender's office is one of the more highly funded ones in the county, in the state?
In the southeast.
Oh, okay.
Definitely
so basically
in the
region. Yeah. So, but I mean, public defender's offices, like, they're typically extremely underfunded. I was looking it up, and like a typical week is like 80 to 100 cases or something like this. Like, how do they combat these challenges? It seems like an immense amount of a workload. So
80 to 100 cases is actually, that's one of the more, that's like our office. That's a more manageable. You go to New Orleans, it's like 300 cases or 250. It's insane. New Orleans is the worst in the country. But the unfortunate reality is public defenders can't do it. We're just humans. So we have to triage and try to quickly go through our cases, see which ones really, and this is problematic, but in our personal perception, deserve our time and effort, because we can only do so much. So we have to try to focus on the ones that really need our help. And the unpleasant truth is the people who don't get a legitimate defense. And those are the ones that the prosecutors make their name on by convicting and sending to prison, because DAs get way more funding than public defenders do. That's another problem. Our country just values punishing crime more than it values upholding rights. And that's reflected in the relative funding between DAs and public defense generally. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. This was a very interesting conversation. Sure. Sorry if I brought you down. No, I mean, honestly, at this point, I just feel like everything in this world brings me down. Yeah. Yeah. But no, it's good to see that there's actually people that are still like working, despite all of the hurdles and all of the challenges, still working to make society better. I mean, that's the whole point of this podcast, is just to highlight people like you that are working every single day despite the challenges. I mean, because there are so many, Well, and, the people I work with, I love it. I'm going to try to work there because the people I work with are working for the right reasons. So they're not money motivated, because you don't go into public defense if you're money motivated, and they're very passionate people. So I love being around public defenders. Yeah, I feel like that's definitely more necessary and more needed in our current judicial and just like criminal justice system as a whole. Because it sounds like from what you're saying, it's just like corruption from within the system in so many different areas, from the judges to the policing to the. I remember I saw an interview of the head of police for, I forgot what state it was, but his whole motive, he even had it on a plaque in the back of his office where he was like, just catch him, some shit like that. And I was like, okay. Doesn't matter if they're guilty, just catch them. Yeah, dude. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. No, thank you. Thank you for joining us on our season finale. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to follow, rate us on Apple Podcasts, and share with your family and friends. You can also follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Earth's Narrative for all of our updates. You can also follow me, your host, on Instagram at
Farhana Ali _. Special thanks to our audio and visual director, Francisco Echeverry. You can follow him at cisco.sound. All links will be in the description. Thank you so much for listening. We will be taking a short break, but don't worry, we will be back very soon. Thank you so much for listening again, and we will talk to you soon.